I asked you before we sat down for this to
Mm.
at least have a stock ready that you thought our listeners might be interested in or benefit from hearing about, or something about that, something you find interesting anyway. You suggested Pinterest. So tell us about
I
Pinterest.
did. Pinterest, yeah. So it almost seems like a legacy technology company. It feels like it's been around for a long time. It has. I definitely knew of it 15 years ago. And it still seems to be, it's a company that I've actually started using. We're looking at house renovations and stuff. I started using again this year. And it still seems to be very much in the same ilk, but it seems to operate in a much better way. One of the reasons it's operating so well is, or at least appears to be from what I can see and what the results are showing, is artificial intelligence. It's using AI to in many ways, but it's essentially it's gathering so much customer data that it can essentially know what you're looking for and suggests and makes recommendations that are more in keeping with your wants and needs. That obviously drives people towards making, or at least clicking on from the website or making purchases which are related to the websites, or related to the way the platform's directed you. That's really important. In terms of AI as well, sorry, it's driving efficiency in terms of how the kind of advertisers use it. Apparently, it's reduced working hours by about 50% in terms of onboarding, which is really important. And essentially all these things, little things, being driven by growth, being driven by AI. So what we're seeing is monthly MAUs, monthly average users, is increasing at quite a steady pace. I think it was about 13% this time last year. It's about 10% this year. The last quarter, that's still pretty strong. 570 million users around the world. I'd say that's quite impressive. It's not in the Facebook realm, but it's considerable. At the same time, the AI angle is allowing it to at least generate more income. So we've had, I think it's average revenue per user has increased by about 6% in the last quarter. Once again, that's quite strong, especially when you consider that they're also growing the number of users they have. Collectively, this adds up to something which is really impressive. As I say, I always start things from the valuation perspective, and this came up because it trades with a price to earnings to growth ratio of 0.53. That's way under its 5-year average, but it's also way under the technology sector average, which is around 1.5, 1.6. Super important to kind of start from that perspective. So it's trading about 17.7 times forward earnings. The issue I have with the PEG ratio in this case, and it's very similar to the example I gave before, I think you have like 10 analysts giving their consensus, or having the consensus forecast for the next 3 years, let's say. And it has a fairly strong growth rate, around 25%, I think, if you average out those years. Then the final year, you've only got one analyst providing an estimate. That estimate is way up here. So it is slightly skewed. Taking that figure out, I think you're still looking at 0.75 PEG ratio, which is very, very strong. I first bought the stock about 6 weeks ago when it was about $24, $25 a share. I went out to 33, but it still looks good value. It's anticipating 12 to 15% sales growth in Q2, which is still really good considering the macroeconomic environment we're looking at. Considering as well that this is a platform which aids the sale of physical goods in many respects. Advertising is its core business. And a lot of those advertisers, or the companies that are going to be selling their products, will be Southeast Asian, they will be Chinese, they will be hit by these US trade policy, these Trumpian tariffs. So it's a company that's doing really well in a challenging environment. I'd also say, and I think this is a kind of important one to note, revenue is very heavily skewed towards the end of the year. Its Q4 runs up into the Christmas period. Now, I'm 99% sure that's obviously because it is the Christmas period. It'd be important if Trump's trade policies are kind of fixed by that point in time, I think that would really help its year. That's just kind of a side point I feel like I should make. Because, of course, it kind of dawned on me earlier that there's no guarantee that Trump's negotiations won't just go on for another 90 days and another 90 days, there's no guarantee that we won't come to a conclusion at the end of the period he's set. But yeah, anyway, I think it's a really interesting stock. I think it's something that people should consider. I know a lot of people will, it's touted as one of its risks. So its average revenue per user is heavily skewed towards the US. So North America only accounts for, I think, 1/5 of its usership, but accounts for, I think, 78% of revenue. So revenue is heavily skewed towards North America. And I actually have a few figures here. So in the last quarter, average revenue per user was $6.50 in North America, $1 in Europe, and 14 cents in the rest of the world. That's a risk, but it's also an opportunity. If Europeans, which, let's face it, are as close as, fairly close to North Americans in terms of purchasing power, start using the app, start using the platform in a similar way to Americans, just small movements in kind of customer behavior, there's a massive opportunity there. But broadly, I think the data all suggests that the stock could be trading higher. There's been talk in the past that its margins are quite thin, but I think the adjusted EBIT margin moved up to 29% for the last 12 months or 20% for the last quarter, which is strong. It's not, it's not huge. I think you see tech companies with much higher EBITDA figures, but still, it's a stock that's very much moving in the right direction. And I think it's really interesting.
So do I, from the sound of it. I haven't looked at Pinterest in a while, but like you, I've started coming back to it recently. My sister-in-law's getting married, and the first thing she is doing is assembling a Pinterest board for the various parts of that need doing. I'm not looking at it for that reason, but I'm aware it has at least one more user in the non-US than it did, say, a week ago.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess a couple of things then on this. So I agree with you in the kind of short-term risk and opportunity type thing. I mean, do you think the reason this is priced as low as it is because it's North America skewed? It's not so very long ago that people were talking about hard landings in the US and potential recessions this year. Pinterest is obviously a kind of smaller operation than Meta in a large number of ways. And I guess the two questions I have are sort of related. One is, if I'm a marketer, any money I spend advertising on Pinterest is money I'm not spending advertising on Meta. What do you think it is? Let's start with this one, actually. What do you think it is that kind of makes Pinterest offer kind of worth people's money and not just a worse version of Meta for the moment?
No, it's a very good question. I'm not, I have not sitting on the other side of the table. Obviously, Sumac doesn't advertise through Pinterest or anywhere really other than Instagram occasionally. But having not sitting on the other side of the table, I guess it's hard to give you a perfect answer to that. But I would suggest potentially it provides a more tailored opportunity. If people are looking for, I think it probably performs better on things like garden appliances and things like this than maybe Facebook would or Meta would. Just because if you're looking at maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's something where you need to be able to visualize things. I'm not too sure, but it clearly has a place, and I think that's a very there's nothing perfectly like it. I know Instagram's picture based, but does it work in quite the same way? Does it suggest things to you almost immediately that pop up around it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's quite so. I think. I'm not perfectly sure, but I suggest the answer to that would be, I think Pinterest clearly has a place in the advertising world, and it's potentially more tailored than you might find at Meta or such.
You're right about the visual nature. Definitely makes it more tailored than Meta. I say you're right, like I know anything about this stuff.
No.
I agree with you that the visual nature of this definitely makes it more. Here's a kind of speculative point from my side about this. I wonder whether there are people who just don't like Meta, and by people I mean users.
Mm,
And I wonder whether they don't object to Pinterest in the same way. So one line of thought I've heard in favor of Pinterest is that it's less toxic than, well, basically anything Meta runs is, apart from
yeah,
maybe WhatsApp, but that doesn't count for the time being. And maybe there's a kind of class of people who think I don't want to be on toxic social media things like X or Meta or any of these other things. I don't
yeah,
mind Pinterest because Pinterest is a bit more friendly. And Meta just can't reach those people, basically. And if
yeah,
you think there is enough of a market there to at least justify some of your advertising budget for the time
yeah.
being, the kind of, I don't know, maybe ethically minded or high minded, or call them what you like here, kind of users. I wonder whether there is a market there that Pinterest has. I've no way of knowing whether this is true or not. This makes sense in my head.
I think it makes a lot. I agree with you. Yeah, it might be doom scrolling without the doomy nature of it. I'm not sure, but
And if that's the case, it might also speak to the other kind of question I had a little bit, which was we're talking
yeah,
US recession and it's heavily skewed US in terms of
yeah,
revenue here. So I
mm,
sort of wonder, well, when all your eggs are in that basket, does a US recession mean that people start holding back their advertising spend? And do they start coming out of Pinterest before they start coming out of Meta? Maybe not, is the answer. If you think there is a
yeah,
market there that you will just lose and that they won't be on Meta and you won't find them there anyway, maybe it's worth hanging on to that kind of niche. I mean, niche businesses are quite nice in certain ways. They're hard to
yeah,
disrupt. They grow a bit. I mean, this is actually growing quite nicely, but they're hard to disrupt. So it's difficult to shake people out of them. If the story that I'm kind of outlining here is right, maybe it's nearly impossible for Meta to disrupt this kind of niche completely. And maybe there is something there for Pinterest that is growing at a nice rate and is going to stick around.
I'd agree. I think the data kind of broadly suggests, at least over the last year or two, that the company's doing really well at what it does, and that's a hard trend to kind of turn around, even if the economic circumstances do move in the opposite direction.